People that know me and my taste in games probably find me incredibly annoying at this point. I hold a firm belief that the indie scene is where the true heart of gaming lies. I don't really enjoy most AAA titles for one reason or another, and especially with all the drama surrounding the giants that stand today, it's simply easier to look elsewhere. I have a major tendency to, as a good friend of mine puts it, niche recommend things. It's a long-running joke whenever I suggest something to him. So, now I'm here to do it to you. These titles, for the most part, are games that with anywhere from fewer than 10 to just over 1,000 reviews on Steam. 1,000 is quite a lot by my metric here, but since they aren't necessarily mainstream, I have decided to include them anyway. So without further ado, here are the top 10 games that you didn't play in 2022. Remnant Records flew under the radar rather heavily amidst the slew of other co-op horror titles that spawned in the wake of Phasmophobia. That isn't to say that this one is a Phas clone, no. Sure, it's another paranormal investigation sorts, with the goal of this one being exorcism of the spirit, which is, in my personal opinion, the far better evolution of this style of game. This one, however, focuses on learning about the spirit's former life in order to ascertain the necessary items around the house for the exorcism. So, say that they talked about being diagnosed with depression or needing to take medicine of some kind. Okay, let's find a bottle of pills, toss that on the exorcism table. Did they go behind a school and stab their friend 10 times? Okay, let's grab a bloody knife and throw that on the table. So on and so forth. Graphically, it's pretty solid as well, and doesn't feel like a mishmash of assets lazily thrown together. I do recognize that they use some assets that I've seen around, but they never feel out of place. It's coherent. On top of that, the different spirits themselves are quite unique from one another. On top of being visually distinct, they also have different methods of stalking and scaring the player, different methods of boosting the exorcism, and so on. And even on top of that, the game has 4 classes. The medium, who can track the spirit, the musclehead, who can rescue others and shatter doors, which is really fun to watch, the electrician, who, well, I mean, they've got a really good flashlight, but they kinda need some work, and the cartomancer and his talismans, who frankly just looks like Jared Leto. Rounding all that are unlockable modifiers for custom difficulties, which can be anything from simply no sprinting or no lights, to wild ones like zero gravity, since you can jump and throw things, or random candies with random effects like teleportation or turning your flashlight into a cat. I cannot recommend this game enough for fans of co-op investigative horror. Crystal Project is definitely the most popular one I'll have on this list, sitting with over 1,000 reviews on Steam. However, that's still not immensely popular, and the people that I have asked about it tend to not have heard of it, so that's good enough for me. Those that know me probably know that I'm not really the biggest fan of JRPGs, especially ones with turn-based combat. I don't care for Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, anything like that. Hell, pretty much anything Square Enix, but that's a story for another time. My favorite JRPG series, for reference, is by far Xenoblade Chronicles. In spite of that, I felt somehow compelled to try Crystal Project, and I'm glad I did. This is a JRPG that eschews story of any kind, instead focusing on parodical writing and crisp, clean gameplay. Combat follows the traditional formula, though the flow of combat feels smooth and not bogged down like what I'm previously used to. There are plenty of classes to unlock and switch between, finding the synergies that work best for you. There's also a ton of rewarding exploration with platforming challenges, occasional puzzles, and more, leading to bonus classes, great gear, and so on. Just recently, the solo dev, yes, a one-man team made this masterpiece, overhauled the replayability of it with a New Game Plus and even an official randomizer. Highly recommend to any JRPG fans and even RPG fans that aren't entirely fond of the J part. The Anacrusis. I was rather surprised that this one is on here, and I wrote the damn script. I remember this one garnering a decent bit of attention in late 2021. I was kind of on board with it, but then I moved on to other games and it launched a little fanfare. Fast forward to just this November, and it's on sale for a fraction of its regular $30 price tag, and a friend and myself pick it up. We were both honestly quite impressed. The game is a horde shooter, much like Left 4 Dead and the ill-fated Back 4 Blood, among others. It has a unique blend of 60s and 70s retro alongside the stranded among the stars sci-fi setting. The massive population of denizens of the Anacrusis have been overtaken by an alien hive mind, and it's up to you and your ragtag group of survivors to wipe them out and escape with your lives. There are a decent number of weapons, and while it's not a quantity to write home about, there are enough for you to find your favorite, and the gunplay itself feels nice and tight. Along the way, you can also find a myriad of special weapons, items, and even boosters for bonus passive traits. While the upgrade system isn't as robust as Back 4 Blood's card system, it simultaneously feels a little more refined, at least as far as my friend and I experienced. The levels themselves have a decent few variations in how you'll progress, with paths changing between runs, as well as a classic horde survival mode for those wanting even more challenge. Overall, it's a game I can recommend, though tentatively at the regular price. It is still very promising. Death Epileptic Pixel Origins is both a mouthful as well as a game that I'm still amazed is free. Just free. Not free to play with microtransactions or anything like that, just free. D.E.P.O is a first-person platformer, leaning more towards your traditional collectathon with its, well, collectibles that contribute directly to progression. A lovely hub world with plenty of its own challenges, plenty of random unlockables, namely cosmetics, and more. This one has a bit of a classic story of, evil corporation runs everything and you've been recruited to help take them down, with just enough going on to be interesting and combined with some decent humor and charm. It's got wonderful level design for the most part, lending itself to solid precision platforming with an array of abilities, as well as some well-crafted puzzles for those looking to accomplish everything that there is to do in each level. It also does have some multiplayer, but that's split screen on PC, and as a result I haven't really had a chance to try it. Again though, this is a free game, you have literally nothing to lose. First-person RPGs are a dime a dozen. However, it's really not easy to get right, it seems. Even rarer are the ones that really accomplish the sort of feel that something like King's Field accomplishes. While I didn't grow up playing that series, I did play Hexen as a young boy, and that sort of first-person dark fantasy really stuck with me. I played both grid and free-moving DRPGs on the DS, such as Orcs and Elves and Mazes of Fate. It's not something that is just achieved by games like Elder Scrolls. There's something simply engrossing about these smaller kinds of worlds with claustrophobic dungeons that is just really hard for me to describe. With that overlong preamble out of the way, Lunacid. This game succeeds in capturing that feeling incredibly well. The atmosphere is heavy, the combat is tight, the exploration is rewarding, the waifus are top-notch, the character design is great. You've got a bird girl and a skeleton bartender. What more could you want there? Sure, there's also a demon girl and there's like a forest nymph type deal, but skeleton bartender. Look at me. The myriad of weapons and spells will lend themselves perfectly to experimentation as well. I found myself enjoying flying around by somewhat breaking a dash ability I found behind a hidden wall, for example. Like I said, exploration is rewarding. Others that manage this retro style did come out this year to some extent, such as Dread Delusion, and while I really enjoyed what I played to that for the most part, I did have a few issues that kind of held it back from being on this list. Still strongly recommend that one on top of Lunacid. The abstract world design of both of these games is just mwah. You have no idea how long I've been waiting for a proper Marble Blast style game. While it may not have been my most played game, it's still one that I have deeply fond memories of having, well, a blast. There have been many games that have done an alright job of emulating the feeling of it, but none that have really felt like they nailed it, at least for me. Then comes Lost Marbles, one that gets it pretty much just right. The physics feel spot on, not being too floaty or too heavy, the level design both visually and structurally are well put together. Oh, and the music is pretty good too. This one is a very easy recommendation for those pining of the days of Marble Blast, even if it's a tad light on content at the moment. I will say that there is one other that emulates Marble Blast pretty well called Marble It Up. However, that not only is that much more expensive and single player only, which kind of puts me off, it also didn't come out this year, having come out in 2018, so really can't be on this list anyway. Also, this Lost Marbles is not to be confused with the 2014 title of the same name. Timeshifters / Operation Pinkeye. This one is, as Triple Jump likes to put it, a wildcard entry. Truth be told, I really like them both, and while they're both a parody of different games, said games are both icons from the legends of Rareware. It's my belief that these games are wonderful parodical homages. If you couldn't tell from the name, Timeshifters is very heavily inspired by Timesplitters, namely 1 and 2, though the massive and utterly ridiculous weapon variety definitely feels more future perfect. The campaign has a fair number of stages, but the missions themselves are over in a matter of minutes in most cases. The characters feel appropriate to the settings and are all voiced, and rather funnily at that. There's also the arcade, where you have a myriad of challenges, some being almost identical copies from 2 that I can recognize, and of course the classic multiplayer. Hell, they even recently added a map maker, though it's presently fairly bare bones. On the other hand, we have Operation Pinkeye. This one focuses on being like GoldenEye, from the aiming to the animations, right down to the hilariously wrapped photographs of faces on the characters. One of the biggest differences is that you're Scottish intelligence, with the full vulgarity and ridiculousness that entails. For the most part, the stages, while still short, are longer than those in Timeshifters and still more and a little more thoughtfully crafted in terms of objectives and progression. Weapons are more standard fare as well, feeling more like a traditional Bond set of armaments and gear. Both of these games are an easy recommendation for fans of either game, and yes, they are different developers entirely. Zofia. This one came out of nowhere for me, much like most of the games in my library. It looked like it had a neat style, and it's a co-op RPG, and it has grappling hooks, so I tried the demo and subsequently bought the game. Zofia is an interesting title. It feels more like an immersive sim with its massive, fairly open-ended level design, especially with the freedom that the grappling hook provides you. We are talking massive levels with tons of verticality. Exploring these will lead to some loot, alternate paths, maybe a puzzle or two, and combat. The combat is definitely the weakest part of the game so far, but it's still in active development and it's, not unplayable. What reason do you have to be going around these incredible landscapes? Well, plague, conspiracy, and so on. Classic fantasy stuff. In between levels, you have a little island to serve as your hub, plus an airship that serves as your entry to adventure. The thing is, you can also fly this airship, and not just in the hub. If it's in the stage itself, it not only serves as a checkpoint for respawns, but you can also fly it around, using it to reach areas even your grappling hook would have trouble with. As you can tell, I kind of like a lot of movement with a lot of freedom, and if you do too, you ought to give this game a shot. Keep in mind, like I said, it is in early access, and so it's obviously not a finished product, but what is already here is pretty fucking promising. Devil's Spire. Yet another first-person dungeon crawling RPG? It's more likely than you think. This one is also thick in atmosphere and somewhat inspired by games like Kingsfield. It being a roguelike, however, it tends to lend itself to inherent replayability. The combat is fairly satisfying, with a solid variety of weapons and spells overall, a lot of RPG mechanical depth, enemy design is rather interesting and doesn't always feel like it necessarily fits. The different enemies will at least, behave differently. So it also has a character creator that I honestly didn't expect, with quite a bit of depth for something that's 2D. There's secret walls, enemy variety, decent boss fights, visceral combat, and a lot of loot to be found. The dev is also quite responsive and takes feedback to heart. It's a passion project, and it shows. I really don't have that much to add to this one. It just honestly speaks for itself. Voltage High Society. This one is a self-described first-person Metroidvania, and I'm inclined to agree for the most part. Set in a mechanical, horror, cyberpunk dystopian mashup setting with some PS1-styled graphics, Voltage High Society may have some of the best immersion on this list. I wanted to avoid the word atmosphere for once. The world itself is interconnected and with many shortcuts to unlock back to previous points, as is the standard for the genre. It's a little less emphasis on the upgrade-gated progression, admittedly, save for one that's required for the game's current only boss fight. Yeah, it's another early access title, but also yes, this one is not only in active development, but shows an immense level of promise with a development team that is also quite receptive to feedback. Even with what is here, there's a solid amount of enjoyment to be had. There's plenty of lore, enemies, and secrets hidden throughout this crumbling city for your reptilian humanoid hands to get a hold of. All in all, 2022 was a great year in the indie scene. So many great titles got released and got some recognition, though obviously most flew under the radar. What I have here is just a mere appetizer of what this year had to offer, and I encourage you to not only try these, but branch out and give some of those random games you find a chance. You might find something really interesting. Just remember, when boredom strikes, the cure may just be obscure.